The militant transgender movement, is that a domestic terrorist threat?
If you are encouraging people to commit acts of violence against the United States government or against your fellow Americans, absolutely, you're involved in a terrorist movement.
We got it, boys. It seems there is an effort from the Trump administration, at least discussion taking place, an interest in labeling or categorizing transgender people differently in the context of actual or alleged political violence. I think, hold on, there was an article about this that I saw, the terminology that they're planning on using. Let me see if I can find this. The senior official explains there's no process per se for dealing with trans people as a threat group, but feels that trans individuals will be increasingly targeted under the banner of violent extremism. Under the plan being discussed, the FBI would treat transgender suspects as a subset of the new threat category for the FBI, nihilistic violent extremists. So 5 million neo-Nazis who shoot up their schools and then commit suicide, these people don't count, okay? Trans people, on the other hand, the Trump administration first created the NVE designation earlier this year to replace the Biden-era label anti-authority and anti-government violent extremists, or AGAVE, created to categorize Jan 6 rioters and other right-wing groups. And it looks like they're going to be using it to fold trans people in. They're sort of repurposing an existing category. Probably saves on paperwork, you know. So it's not quite all transgender people are terrorists, but it's more in the like you'd be subject to additional scrutiny or set into a new kind of categorization, which is not good, which is not great.
As many as 20 or more other people who may have corresponded with this assassin beforehand. There may have been foreknowledge of the shooting. If there are co-conspirators here, what kind of threat level are we talking about?
Well, we don't know, Jesse, and that's why I've been so proud of Cash and the way that he's handled this investigation, because he's cast as wide a net as humanly possible, and the FBI really is looking at everything. By the way, there's a lot of weird stuff out there. For example, the CEO of Discord, or one of the leaders of Discord, said that there were no Discord chats that involved this guy. Now we know that there were Discord chats that involved this guy. So we need to look at everything. We need to leave no...
That's not what the Discord CEO said, if I recall correctly. The Discord CEO actually said that the shooting was not planned on Discord. Like, Discord was not the platform the shooter used to organize or enact it. Rather, after the shooting took place, the shooter said on Discord, "Oh yeah, Lamau, that happened," or something to that, you know, effect. But why not lie about everything, right? They are bringing in a bunch of social media CEOs to testify. They're bringing in Gabe Newell of Steam, which is really funny. He's going to get to go and testify. He's they're bringing in the Discord CEO. They're bringing in Reddit CEO. They're not bringing in Elon, even though he owns Twitter, which is funny because Twitter's literally like the neo-Nazi app, you know? Twitch as well. Yes, that's right. Gabe Newell will be pretty funny over there. He's pretty libertarian, so the idea of him being brought in as part of a censorship campaign, I imagine he'll be pretty cross about it.
Stone unturned. My own attitude to this, and people will send me stuff, Jesse, you know, from the deepest, darkest corners of the internet. Some of it sounds pretty crazy, but I'll send it to Cash and I'll talk to my team because I want us to leave no stone unturned. It's the only way to honor Charlie is to get to the bottom of exactly how this person was radicalized and who else was involved in it. Now, we could find out that this person was radicalized and it was terrible and there were a lot of very evil people in his life, but they didn't have foreknowledge.
Right.
We may find out that there were many, many people who were involved in helping this guy pull off the shooting. We just have to get to the bottom of it. That's what justice demands.
There is no evidence whatsoever of this being the case. Seems like it was truly a lone wolf.
That's what being a good friend to Charlie demands.
The militant transgender movement, is that a domestic terrorist threat?
If you are encouraging people to commit acts of violence against the United States government or against your fellow Americans, absolutely, you're involved in a terrorist movement. I don't know enough about that particular organization, but what you increasingly see, Jesse, is you see people in the trans community and other members of the far left who are saying...
They're really putting a spotlight on Vance, aren't they? That's because these ideas are too complicated for Trump to convey. Trump is a mascot. But if they want the White House to be like an advocate for more targeted, you know, anti-Jewish laws or whatever, this administration's equivalent of what the Nazis did was. You need to have him here. It is particularly funny. Oh, gotcha. I think I had earbuds in. Trump's a mascot. Oh, it's particularly funny because for JD Vance to be like pearl clutching about internet extremism, JD Vance is literally an internet neo-Nazi troll. Like, he follows other internet neo-Nazi trolls on Twitter. He's been in their group chats. Like, he's a fucking shanner, you know?
They are so threatened by negative rhetoric that they must take arms and attack people. If your movement is telling you to commit acts of violence against people for speaking words that you don't like, number one, you're evil, and number two, you are engaged in a terrorist movement, and that's part of what we have to root out in the White House. And this is very important, Jesse. I've talked to a lot of people about this. I've talked to, Stephen Miller probably 7 times in the past 2 days. We are working very hard to ensure that
It's always interesting how anytime it comes back to some insane Hitler shit, you keep coming back to the Deputy White House Chief of Staff. Like, really? That's the guy you're talking to, not Kash Patel or Tulsi Gabbard or Pam Bondi? It's just fun, because, like, we know that Miller is one of the only, operators behind the scenes in the White House, and that he's also a neo-Nazi. It's just funny that J.D. Vance admits that, rather than pretending this is some kind of, like, broad, ordinary procedure.
Funding networks for left-wing violence, that the radicalization networks for left-wing violence, that if you encourage or fund your fellow Americans or anybody else to commit acts of violence because you disagree with political speech, you are going to be treated like a terrorist organization, and we're going to go after you.
Because
really, though, like, we are looking down the barrel of the end of the First Amendment here. If supporting domestic terror gets expanded out into any expressions of support or sympathy for any organization's branded terrorist groups, and the branded terrorist groups are gender ideology extremists and Antifa, then yeah, like, it's just a blanket permission slip to arrest literally any figure on the left. That's it. That's pretty much all she wrote, really. Remember, the Nazis never abolished the Weimar Constitution, they just made it meaningless? Yeah, why attract all the bad PR of outright abolishing the Constitution when you could just make it irrelevant, It's pretty nasty. It's pretty bad.
Joe Biden said white supremacy was the biggest domestic terror threat.
Which, of course, is absurd. The statistics don't bear that out. But if you look at what the Biden administration did against the phantom threat of white supremacy, we actually need to take...
Dude, it's literally like that Dave Rubin, Lauren Southern debate. Man, it's just crazy how it only took like 5 years for stuff that was on alt-right YouTube to become official government policy. Remember that Lauren Southern thing where Dave Rubin and Lauren Southern were both pretending to be opposed to white supremacy, but they were like bewildered by the categorization? Like, who would be a white supremacist in this day and age? That's crazy, like downplaying its existence. Meanwhile, both of them, of course, are white supremacists. Yeah. DOJ deleting a
some of the lessons
right-wing terrorism study. Yeah, I saw that. Pretty funny. I say, clenching my teeth. DOJ deletes study alleging rise in far-right terrorism in the U.S. That's cool. There's nothing that they can do to keep people from despising them, but boy, can they make it painful too.
If there is funding sources that is going for this stuff, if you're an NGO and you're actually funding riots and other kinds of political violence, why wouldn't we go after that? Why wouldn't we cut off those funding sources? And why wouldn't we prosecute people who engage in violence? It's interesting, Jesse. The people who are saying this is Gestapo stuff, they're calling us Nazis.
He doth protest too much, by the way. In the same rambling speech where he talks about how white supremacy isn't a real threat, gender and sexual minorities are the real threat, and we need to go after like all of our political enemies and deny them free speech. Now, would people call us Nazis? Buddy, you're supposed to act bewildered when people bring that up. You're not supposed to like preemptively address it. It's clearly on your mind.
For saying that if you're funding or supporting left-wing violence, you ought to pay consequences for it. It really makes you think that the left has not done any of the soul searching it has to do to actually deal with political violence in this country.
Jasmine Crockett says, yeah, she calls people Hitler, but it doesn't mean she's responsible for any violence that happens.
Well, I'd ask Jasmine Crockett, what is it that you want people to do when you call them Nazis? What is it that you want them to do when you call them fascists? What is the proper response when you say that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and Charlie Kirk
I mean,
are
you could
threatening your safety.
You could stop being them, I suppose. Really, though, like, again, I know that you guys know this. It's just the administration is really, 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 really ramping up the rhetoric. They want to make it illegal to criticize them. Trump has said as much in recent days. I mean, he said as much for years, but like they're very explicitly saying like it should actually be illegal to call the right-wing fascists, because that itself is an implicit threat of violence. You can't even identify what they are.
What do you expect people to do? This rhetoric is completely out of control, and it's part of this entire network of violence that exists on the far left. You dehumanize your political opponents. You fund paid activists to go and harass them and terrorize them. We've had a White House senior staffer just in the past week who has had actual representatives of the Democratic Party going around passing leaflets trying to get his neighbors to harass him and showing people where he lives, where his wife lives, where his young family lives. If that's not political violence, if that's not political harassment, I don't know what the term means.
Barack Obama says
a woman was doxxed by a Republican in government just a few days ago on Twitter for pulling down a Charlie Kirk remembrance poster in the hallway of her apartment. Like, security camera footage showed her pulling down a sheet of paper, and a Republican in government said, "Oh, here's her information. Here's who she is." It took less than a year. We are now probably the least democratic Western country. Certainly in terms of like rights concerning freedom of speech or freedom of political expression, we are now easily below. I can't think of any other Western country that even comes close. If you don't count Hungary, yeah. I don't know if I really count Hungary as a Western country, but I guess, sure. Maybe if we expand the definition a little bit.
your White House is dividing the country and you're exploiting Kirk's death to attack Democrats.
We're not exploiting Charlie Kirk's death to do anything except for achieve justice. And I think if Barack Obama,
can't keep his fucking name out of your mouth, though.
That's absolutely disgusting. What we're trying to do is understand how young people are getting radicalized and who is funding all of these efforts at radicalization. We saw this in the summer of 2020. Now, thank God that wasn't primarily, actually, over 20 people died in the riots in the summer of 2020. That is political terrorism. But it's not just the people who are killing the cops. It's not just the people who are engaging and throwing the Molotov cocktails and in the riots. Where was the money coming from? Who was organizing this violent activity? That is not going after Democrats unless, by implication, you're saying every single Democrat is involved in planning political violence.
This is why I'm not debate pilled. And this is why I don't think it comes down to rhetoric. These people are demons. There's no rhetorical trick you can play here. They're obviously factually wrong. They lie constantly. What are you supposed to do when the official position of the party is left-wing extremists commit most of the political violence? They say as they delete the study showing the opposite. There's no argument you can make here. And the people who are motivated by this rhetoric are not going to have their minds changed by being fact-checked, okay? It ultimately comes down to, like, their moral position at the end of the day is bad things are good and good things are bad, and that's it. It's that simple. If you point out it's bad for them to commit actual terrorism, they'll pretend they never did, and they'll say, well, the real terrorism was when tens of millions of people peacefully protest for George Floyd after his murder. You know, there is no way around this. And the operating logic here is indistinguishable from that of the neo-Nazis that I've debated before. And I gotta say, folks, in spite of the numerous holes in their ideology, I have yet to directly convince anyone who disbelieved in the Holocaust that they were incorrect on that position, you know? I really think, and you get this impression after enough of these debates, people who don't think the Holocaust happened just aren't that movable by reason. They're actually not that open to having their mind changed. You know, they might pretend that they're open to having their mind changed, but they're actually not.
If that's true, then the problem isn't on Barack Obama's side. We're going to get to the bottom of the truth, and we're going to stop the political violence. And we're going to do it however we have to do it, of course, within the constitutional limits that Charlie loves so much.
Joe Biden's FBI investigated Turning Point, investigated Charlie Kirk.
I found out a couple of days ago, Jesse, that Joe Biden's FBI investigated a dear friend of mine who's a political consultant. They were sicking law enforcement after their political opponents every single...
God, I hate them for not doing anything with it, too. Like, the entire right is obviously a festering breeding ground for seditionist traitors who, now that they have the power to do so, are just deleting the Constitution, and you just let all of that slide. On Thursday evening, Ken Klippenstein reported the FBI is developing tools to identify trans suspects and classify them as, quote, nihilistic violent extremists. Within hours, the Heritage Foundation released a 4-page memo urging the Bureau to go even further. Its proposal: formally designate all transgender activism as trans ideology-inspired violent extremism, a new category of domestic terror threat. It's important to note the Heritage Foundation is not itself the federal government, right? And to our knowledge, its proposals are not yet in place. Just, you know, the Heritage Foundation has gotten to dictate every other element of the government's policy. Like, every single thing in Project 2025 is being done. So, you know. The memo's first section lays out its definition of transgender ideology-inspired violence and extremism, a term it urges the FBI to adopt as official doctrine. Under its test, anyone who believes violence is justified against opponents of trans ideology would qualify. Oh, that's it. But the definition doesn't stop there. It also includes anyone who argues that stripping away trans rights constitutes violence or an existential threat to trans people. Oh, okay. If you think removing the rights of trans people is a threat to trans people, you would officially be a terrorist. I'm not visiting the USA even harder right now. I cannot overstate how much you should not visit the United States. The memo goes on to explain how such a definition could be weaponized. It's the Heritage Foundation, so they're designing a policy roadmap for Republicans, which means they have to write this shit out in crayon so it can be understood by people with a second grade reading level comprehension. So they need to explain how this could be weaponized. Yeah, basically create a new category that would label all of your enemies as terrorists. Now, here's how you could take advantage of that. Oh, they have a memo. What are the typical characteristics of, trans identity violent extremists? Typically target Christian and religious groups justified by claims of existential threats, features mental illness, self-harm, suicidal tendencies, and lack of respect for genetic human realities, amplified by online radicalization. Echo chambers promote violence against critics. Your common TIVE slogan, protect their right to exist. Now, at least we have a bit of time here. Under Kash Patel, the FBI is so slow to move and so incompetent. I don't know how quickly they could adopt these, even if they wanted to. You think SCOTUS would uphold this trash? Not really their field. Well, I guess we'll see.